It's time to make a plate. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. And today we're going to turn a plate. And before you say it, yes, this plate is going to have all the characteristics of a bowl. You got it. I'm going to be doing all the same techniques, except it's going to be a little bit different. The center bottom of this bowl will actually be pretty much horizontal, but it is going to be slightly concave. So it's technically a really wide, pretty flat bowl. Now I'm using a piece of quarter sawn hickory. Quarter sawn, as you've known from some of my other videos, I love quarter sawn wood. Essentially what I did is I took a large log. If you can imagine this, this is the pith or the center area right here. And this log was about 2 foot in diameter. Instead of leaving that pith in and causes problems because there's typically cracking that occurs with the pith, what I did is I made 2 cuts down the center of the log right through the pith area and then cut that pith out and removed it. Well, that slab that was removed while making those 2 cuts is the quarter sawn wood. This is coming 90 degrees off the pith, and this is great wood to turn for a variety of different reasons. In this case, it's going to have heart and sapwood, which makes it really interesting. But what's really great about quarter sawn wood is it's only going to contract and pull in sideways. It's not going to have a really dramatic curved contraction as it dries. This has been equalizing for some time now, and I'm not too concerned with the movement after this is turned. There'll probably be very little, if any, noticeable movement in this wood after it's turned. So I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw, we're going to shape it, and then bring it back over to the lathe. Let's go ahead and get started.
First thing I'm going to do is bring my guide or my guard down for the bandsaw. Now that's one of the really important things. I see a lot of people not doing that on their videos. They leave that guard really high up and it's super dangerous. Now I've got a video all about the basics you're going to need to know about the bandsaw. You're going to want to check that out. You take your time here and just go slow. Now this is a template I use. It's just a rough guide. This is not going to be a perfect circle, but it's going to get that rough material away from the corners and the edges of this piece so that I can easily turn this on the lathe. So with that done, I'm going to take this over to the lathe. I'm going to mount this to a face plate, and before I do that, I'm going to take a couple measurements here and find the center of this blank. If you're off even a ½ inch or ½ centimeter or a centimeter rather, you're going to lose quite a bit of material. So it's worth taking a little bit of time and centering that up. Now I'm going to use shorter screws than I normally recommend. And the reason for that is I don't want long screws going into the meat of this turning and potentially leaving holes where I want the bottom of the plate to be. So I'm using slightly shorter screws, but I'm using every single hole. And I know from past experience with this wood, this hickory is very hard and these screws grip very well. So this is not the typical screw length that I recommend, but I know that these will hold. So I'm going to clean up the face of this bowl, or plate rather. Every time you make a face cut like this, it's a great time to practice your bowl gouge techniques. Make sure you're riding that bevel. Make sure you've got the nose angled towards the cut. And just take your time and try to make each cut as smooth and even as possible. Now I have the material is a little bit unlevel on one side, and it takes a little bit of time before I get down to a continuously smooth surface here. We want to start with a clean, flat face. And while I'm at it, I'm going to clean up that edge. As you saw with the bandsaw, I didn't clean it up perfectly. There's a bark edge and then there's a rough, flat edge. So we're going to have to take away a little bit of that material to round this out. Once we have the piece rounded out, then we have a good clean blank to be working with. And that's where you want to start pretty much any turning for that matter. So again, I'm just making light push cuts from left to right, angling my bowl gouge with the cut, and I'm riding that bevel. When you hear the term riding the bevel, what it essentially means is that bevel is parallel to the cut surface. Now, I've got a video all about riding the bevel. You might want to check that out. Still have a little bark in there and a little bit of that low spot, so I'm going to remove some more material. And you don't want to get too aggressive with these. You want to make these cuts relatively light, take away as much material as possible, but if you make the cut too deep, it's a little bit hard on the lathe and you're going to be tearing out ingrain fibers. There's a little bit of that bark edge still, and I've got pith in here. I thought the pith was completely removed, but there's a little bit of pith area in here, and I didn't really want that in here. So that's going to need to be removed as well. We'll deal with that a little bit later. Okay, that's looking better. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to size up my mortise. I'm going to make a recessed mortise on this, and I'm sizing the 4-jaw chuck using my dividers, and then I will transfer that measurement from the dividers to the bowl. What I'm doing is I'm just touching the left side of the divider, and I have the right side just over it. I don't want that right side to touch because it'll flip over. Now I have the diameter of the 4-jaw chuck transferred to the face of this plate. And I'm going to use a parting tool to remove a little bit of material here. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I don't recommend any of the traditional spindle tools for bowl turning for removing large amounts of the bowl. In this case, I'm basically doing very light cuts in a very small controlled area. What you don't want to do is you don't want to use spindle tools for roughing out material and roughing out a large amount of material because they are really not designed to handle the stress and the forces. That's why you really want to go to a bowl gouge that has that extra robust beefiness to it that can handle what you're doing when you're turning a bowl. But in this case, we're just removing a small little groove here. Now I've got a specialty tool for turning the inside of a mortise and putting the dovetail angle on. That dovetail angle is about 11 degrees, and you can see this tip is going to hook around there and help scrape that edge. You want to define the edge first at 90 degrees using some type of tool like the parting tool or some other scraper. And then you can use this tool to get in there and put that inside bevel on. And that inside bevel is so important because that is what the jaws of the 4-jaw chuck are going to grip into, and they will not be able to slide off when you have that dovetail in there. Now I'm bringing the tailstock up for a couple reasons. The main reason is so that I have a mark in the bottom of this plate so that I can recenter this on a jam chuck when I get done. And that's also why I left that center material, because I'm going to remove that towards the end. My goal is to remove all of the area where the recessed mortise is and make it appear as if there was no mortise there at all. I want just a simple little ring on there, and I'm going to remove that whole center area, but I need some way to attach this to the tailstock when I put it on a jam chuck. So I'm just curving the outside shape of the bowl, or the plate rather, and I have to leave a thick area next to that recessed mortise for support. If I make the outer edge around that ring really thin and I put this into the 4-jaw chuck and put pressure on it, it could easily break through that ring. So I have to leave a little bit of beefiness there. I'm going to come back and fine tune that when we reverse this backwards. Okay, so I'm going to mount the 4-jaw chuck to the lathe, and then I'm going to expand those jaws into that recessed mortise. You can see them expanding. You don't want to over tighten it. Now you can see also there too, if I made that ring really thin, you can see how tightening that would potentially break that wood in that area. So I'm going to start removing material from this blank. And I know they have that crack from the pith area. It's important to note that you may have cracking that is caused from the pith that's not directly in the center of that log. The pith can actually crack out into the log pretty far. And in this case, there's a little bit of that cracked material that's still in this piece. So I have to remove that material. And that's okay, because I have enough material here that I can remove. Plus, I want to make this relatively thin. Remember, this is a plate, not a bowl. So I'm going to take this material down so that we have a nice clean material to use for the final plate. Now, all that being said, I am going to have the outside walls of this plate curved similar to a bowl. Here you can see that rough material. Obviously, I don't want that in the bottom of my plate. So I'm going to keep removing. I'll slice off another pass of that. See, I got a little too aggressive there and actually caused the belt on the lathe to skip a little bit. Now I'm just roughing this out, so I'm kind of going quickly. You can see I'm leaving tool marks there, but it's a roughing cut. And I'm also noticing that even when I'm trying to go a little bit slower, my tool is not cutting very well. So guess what time it is? Yep, it's time to go sharpen my bowl gouge. We're getting closer, but there's still a little more that needs to be removed. Before I go sharpen it, I'm just going to go ahead and rough that out because I know I'm going to have to go through that material. It's one of those things where you know you've got one more roughing pass to make, and it's not a bad idea just to get that out of the way, and then you'll have a nice sharp tool to come back and do more detailed cuts. All right, that's looking a lot better. Still got a little bit there, don't I? All right, well, hopefully there's going to be enough material here. We'll see how this works out. But you can also see those tool marks. Now, each time I'm making a pass like this, I'm trying to intentionally make it as good as possible. Why would I do that? Well, it's practice. This material is not being wasted for nothing. It's a great opportunity for me to practice my push cut, riding the bevel, and making a nice clean cut with the bowl gouge. Okay, that's looking really good. Now I need to sharpen my tool for sure. Now, if you're not comfortable sharpening your tool, if you're not aware of how to sharpen your tool, it's not complicated. I've got a course all about tool sharpening, and once you get up to speed, you're going to be able to sharpen your tool as fast as you're seeing me do it here. This is all in real time. I'm not accelerating anything. I'm not cutting anything out. It doesn't take long at all. And I also go over tool shaping. So if you want to use a bowl gouge shape like you're seeing here or any other bowl gouge shape, I'll show you how to do that in that course. I'm going to round over this edge just a little bit using a push cut, and then I'm going to do a scraping cut. I don't want that to be super sharp there. I'm using the lower wing here to do a scraping cut. Just take your time, make sure you've got the tool rest in there to support the bowl gouge. Now I'm going to start removing material and shaping the inside of this plate. Exactly the same way. I'm going to establish the wall thickness and the curve and just follow the exterior of this plate. Now it's a little bit tricky because when you see the outside of the plate right here, it's a little bit more curved than what the final piece will be because I'm going to remove some of that outer curve that is around the mortise. It's a little tricky doing this, and it's kind of one of the reasons I don't like the mortise compared to the shoulder and tenon, because I'm essentially going to work back and forth 3 times. The outside of this plate is not completely established because I need to leave more material around the outside of that mortise. So I'm going to need to come back to the base and shape that. But I also want to remove evidence of that mortise as well when I reverse this and work the bottom of it. So the ideal goal is I'm going to finish up the interior here, reverse it, and remove that mortise, or at least the beveled edge of that mortise, and then clean out the center of the mortise so there's just a little ring foot on the bottom of this plate. So I'm making bevel riding push cuts to the center here, and I'm just taking my time. Now this is slightly concave, and you want to make sure that you're just meeting up with the other side here to merge that center. You don't want a divot and you don't want a bump there. So you just want to go real slow, and I'm going back to kind of merge in all of those cuts, just making a light pass here. And you can see the interior of this plate is just going to be gradual from the rim down into the center, just a real gradual angle. And the bottom is almost horizontal, but it's still coming into the middle just a little bit. Very light. Remember, you don't want to push through that final nub on the center because you can rip out fibers there, and if you do that, you'll have a little divot. So just take your time. I'm rotating the tool and closing that and just slicing off that little bit right there. All right, that's looking great. And I'm going to go ahead and sand this. I'm starting at 120 grit, going to 180, 240, and then 320. Sanding with the lathe going. I'm getting the outside curve of the rim. We'll still need to shape the bottom of the plate, but the rim curve, getting that with the sander. And then I'm also sanding with the lathe off to remove any scratch marks. Don't want to sand across the center of the piece with the lathe going because you'll change the shape of the center. I've got a video all about sanding bowls, and you can check that out as well. Okay, so I'm mounting jam chuck. Now this is an older jam chuck that hasn't been used for a while, and it's changed shape a little bit, which is fine. So I'm just going to put it on the lathe and clean up the front of this so it turns nice and smooth. You can also see the nice part of this jam chuck is I have a big wide ring here, and that will make a good supported contact to the inside of the plate when I mount that. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. Now you'll see a little bit of wobble on the back side of this jam chuck, but the nose of it that we'll be using will be smooth and turning true. So I'm making the center concave because I don't want that to be pushing into this center of the plate. I want that big ring to be supporting it. I'm going to put a piece of foam in there, and then I'm going to bring the tailstock up. Now you can see that mark that I made with the tailstock initially, how important that is. This would be probably almost impossible to center back up. So I'm going to use a scraping cut, a pole cut. Now you can start to see what I'm intending to do here. I just want that little edge there where the recessed mortise was to be a bump, and I would like to remove all this material. I'm hearing a little bit of a sound here, and I'm somewhat concerned. I'm gonna pause here in a moment. I'm gonna measure something. This is a scraping cut. You can see how I have the flute angled towards the surface, and I'm just using that lower edge. And that's what I would like to. Honestly, that mortise is too deep. I wish it were made a lot shallower. And I would like to remove that whole center area so that the inside of this is flat, but I've discovered that that mortise is way too thin. And the amount of material that I removed from the front of this bowl, or plate rather, I keep saying bowl because that's normally what I'm turning. And this is a bowl. It's just a very wide, shallow bowl. That recessed mortise is much thinner than it should be. So I don't have the material I need to do exactly what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this material as much as possible without causing issues. I'm using my 1/2" 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge for this. And I'm doing this just like I would remove a nub with a tenon. I'm going to get in there in just a second with my spindle detail gouge to try to reduce this a little bit more. It's very short, so it's tricky to get this down in there. Now I'm switched over to the spindle detail gouge, and this gives me the point that gets down in there deeper. I'm just going to try to remove this as much as possible. I'm not going to be able to cut this off like you see me do a lot of times with a tenon because it is so shallow. Okay, so we removed that as much as we can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sand that off. I'll show you how we sand that off. I'm going to use this jam chuck and the 4-jaw chuck as a base. And then I'm going to go ahead and sand that off. I'm just using the edge. This is 120 grit. Just take your time and use the side of the sanding pad. And you want to switch it back and forth so you don't accidentally go down too far on one side. Just sand down until you get to the surface. Kind of want to just work it back and forth there. You want to be careful you don't touch the ring or the rim there too much. Switching back and forth so it's a nice even shape that it's created, but it's pretty easy to erase that nub with the sander. And there's the plate. It actually looks great on this side. I wish the bottom turned out a little bit better. I'm using tried and true Danish oil. This is 100% boiled linseed oil, and this is boiled in the old-fashioned traditional way. I've got videos about it. I'm not going to go into it here, but it is a really good finish, and it's 100% food safe. It just really brings out the grain and the color and the contrast between that heartwood and the sapwood. Oh my gosh, look at that. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love this shape. It's so simple and so clean. This is one of those shapes I'm a little concerned with because it's like, can we repeat that shape? I think I can, but it's very subtle and it's just nice when it works out like that. Oh, look at that grain. Absolutely beautiful. Very, very happy with this piece. Well, except for the bottom.
All right, here's the final plate, and I got to tell you, I really like the size of this, the feel of it, just this gradual curve. I think this could be something I would use on a regular basis. The size of this is about 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters across. So it's a good size for portioning too, not too huge. Keep those portions down, right? Well, here's what didn't go right. Now this is not what I intended. The bottom of this, I did not want to look like this. I only wanted to have a nice smooth bottom of the plate with a simple ring on it as a foot. That's it. However, when I went to shape this bottom portion, I discovered that the area that I made for the recessed mortise was very thin. How thin, you ask? Well, let's take a look. It's that thin right there. It's not very thick at all. The plan was to shape this bottom so it was smooth across and to take the dovetail for that recessed mortise out. So again, there would just be this little bump of a ridge all the way around. However, that's not how it worked out. And I have to tell you, this is one of the reasons why I do not like recessed mortises. I've got a video that goes into more detail, but this is a great example. When I'm out here shaping this, it's really almost impossible to judge where that recessed mortise bottom is inside here. And I could have easily gone through that. And I know there are many ways to measure that, but I thought I had more material than I did, and I didn't. That's why I love using a shoulder and a tenon. If I had a shoulder out here and a tenon, I would have all this material remaining to be shaped when I'm done turning the bowl. And that's why I like tenons over recessed mortises. But I was able to determine that was too thin. Had I gone and tried to level this out and make this all one plane inside, I most likely would have gone through right in the center. So that's why I ended up shaping it like I did, which I don't like that. And the other thing I don't like about recessed mortises is it tells everybody how this was attached to the lathe. It's very obvious that was the connection, and that was why I wanted the foot to just be a little bump ring around there that didn't give any indication that that's how this plate was attached to the lathe. But it didn't work out that way. I was able to save it and determine that if I had kept going, it would have messed up this plate. So all in all, it's a nice looking plate. Just don't look down here because that's not what I intended. All right, I hope you guys liked this video. If you have, do me a huge favor and click that like button. And while you're down there, leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about this. Let me know if you're going to turn a plate and if you will use a recessed mortise or a shoulder and tenon when you do it. I'd love to hear from you. Be sure to check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know about turning wood bowls. You got it. And I have online courses that will help you quickly accelerate your wood bowl turning skills. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, like always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy turning.